You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes over and bulldozed their villages, seized their property and their laws? They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the August Foreign Policy Focus live stream. I'm doing this on a new service, and, I'm going to see how well it works. Please give me feedback and let me know, because I do want to put out, a particularly good product for those patrons. Today is also, this episode here, this live stream will run as episode 393 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. And so for the regular listeners now, welcome to the show. I have some questions that I got sent you in the week leading up to the podcast, so I'm going to tackle those first. Since this is the patron show, I just want to give a huge shout out to everybody making more this month on Patreon than I was last month. And, that's always the goal, is to be producing a product that people, actually want to give me a little bit of money for. So I appreciate all those of you who are donating to the show for doing that. And, Adam is one of the longtime donors to the show. And, so he's joined me on this live stream, as well as he's been a past guest on the show. I believe you were on talking about the USS Maine, right, Adam? And the U.S. Getting into the early days of the empire. And so I'll be sure to link to that one on the show notes page. I just want to remind everyone that Adam's blog is No King But Christ. You find him on Facebook there, occasionally at the Libertarian Institute, and I believe we ran one or two of his articles now in the viewpoint section of antiwar.com as well. So
up to 3 now.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just keeping better count than I am on that. All right. So the first, kind of question I had today was about John Bolton's, Troika of Tyranny, and just kind of right now what the U.S. economic policy is against these 3 countries in Latin America, and that is Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. I'm going to go in that order, answering kind of what the U.S. economic warfare looks like in those countries, because it is pretty different in all 3 countries. Although, the effects are pretty much the same as economic warfare. So in Venezuela, the U.S. had imposed sanctions back under Obama, I believe in 2014, and there was probably some long-standing sanctions against various elements in Venezuela for some time. Of course, the Latin American drug trade's a thing, and, there's always accusations that first the Chavez and now Maduro government have been involved in these kind of, drug smuggling operations and that kind of stuff. But recently it's more he's bad to his own people kind of thing. Not sure if people can still hear me. It looks like, I'm frozen here. Once I get back moving, I'm asking Adam if he can hear me.
It cuts out every once in a while, but it's alright. I'm hearing a bunch of it. Most of it.
All right. Well, that's better than none of it, I suppose. Yeah. It's pretty hot here. I am in the process of moving, so I don't know if that has something to do with my laptop not performing up to top speed here. But, to get into more, it's the U.S. trying to assert its dominance over the world. I mean, Venezuela is a big oil state, and so, them, being willing to do oil business with, China and other countries, India, prevents, the U.S. from having complete global hegemony. And so that's part of it. Under the Trump administration, the economic war really ramps up. And this is where you have the major targeting of widespread Venezuelan business and all these super oppressive economic sanctions that are having a real toll on the Venezuelan people. Jeffrey Satz authored a study that said that the U.S. sanctions contributed to the death of 40,000 Venezuelans. I mean, that's a real big and significant number of people dying, there. And so that is the toll of the U.S. economic warfare there. At times it seemed like maybe Trump has started to lose interest in the Venezuela issue and was more focused on, Iran or other regions of the world. But even recently, he ramped up sanctions again against Venezuela, basically saying anybody who does business with the Maduro government risks being sanctioned. And of course, with the major flaws within Venezuela's own government, communist corruption and all that, it's not a surprise that, the oil company is owned by the state. And so now, the state oil company can't sell any oil, and there's just a ton of problems there. And it's not the kind of situation that's going to help any Venezuelans. And I think Venezuela is exporting still quite a bit of oil because they're doing it because they owe China a lot of money, and there's weird credit transfers that it's able to go through. But the U.S. has been able to really reduce Venezuela's oil output, which is their major export. Am, you got anything to jump in with here?
I was going to mention that that food tanker that they seized the other week, right? I remember seeing that as part of that kind of renewed push.
Yeah, so this is a big story that you would imagine, Adam, here, that if China, Russia, or Iran has seized an oil tanker or a food tanker going to a country that was, struggling for people to eat, what they would be called. They would be ripping the food out of babies' mouths and doing all these terrible things. Where when the U.S. is behind seizing the food products, then, we're just enforcing sanctions against a very oppressive regime to free the people.
Yeah, it reminds me of the blockade. I think it was in World War II, right? I don't think it was World War I. Sometimes I get them mixed up. There's so many of the same actors, but, I think it was World War I. So the blockade continued against Germany. I think a British blockade, even after the treaty was signed, right? But those were huge numbers, going there. It reminds me of the Iraqi sanctions, obviously, where, and I mentioned this in a previous piece on, kind of understanding, suicide terrorism, how bin Laden specifically mentions the sanctions, the starvation of Iraqi civilians as one of the justifications for 9/11 and any of the kind of, what he calls a crusade or a jihad, but basically Al-Qaeda actions. I don't, this is, a mainstay today of foreign policy, this sanctioning, and for some reason it is powerful and supported a lot of times, but, we should all know that, they're not, sanctions like that are never going to hurt those with power and those with money as much as they're going to hurt those who don't have either. So if you're really trying to help the Venezuelan people, we really need to think of it more in terms of that those people, either they support their government, in which case there's nothing to protect them from really, from a self, direction, independence perspective, or they're not in league with their government, and in which case they're held prisoner, basically. This is the same case in Korea, right? In North Korea. It's a sad situation to be in, but they're being held hostage. So how do you handle hostage situations? You usually don't, make things hotter and raise the temperature.
Well, unless you're the U.S. government.
Well, sure. And this is the, this kind of strong leadership, this sense of, that we have to be a major actor here. It's interesting to me. It seems like, and I haven't, followed these things for decades or anything like that. But it definitely seems like, that we hear more about Russia, China, bigger actors, and for instance, the EU, I think about the, JCPOA deal, how they're kind of, trying to revive that, on their own without the U.S., really flexing some of their independence, especially economically. And with bigger actors like China and Russia, kind of flying in the face of U.S. interests, the supposed interests or, their proposed or preferred situation, pushing back against what otherwise would have been the U.S. standard policy for decades, right? Basically whatever we say goes, whatever we want to sanction, everyone gets on board with. We're seeing now, especially with Iran. And so that is definitely relevant. Before the show, I was mentioning to Kyle how, Venezuela used to be a large trading partner for oil in the Western Hemisphere. And I don't know exactly when that switched off. My guess is it's around the same time as the drug war heating up and the Cold War and everything, kind of souring South America, in the U.S. eyes. And you'll probably touch on that in Nicaragua and everything, as well, because there's plenty of Cold War history there too. But it was the point that, whereas Venezuela was kind of the big major player in oil in the Western Hemisphere, Iran has been the major player in the Eastern Hemisphere for a long time, for Europe and for Asia. So you can definitely see that in the, JCPOA renegotiations and everything in the Eastern Hemisphere. And, for a while they took it from 1950s on, I guess. But now, they have other allies that would be there. And, I don't know why a country like the U.S. wants to, assume that, free markets and trade and voluntary economic cooperation is something that doesn't lead to greater prosperity and greater, freedom. This seems quite un-American to me.
and maybe this is a good time to switch over, to Cuba, where if there's, proof that, sanctions and economic isolation doesn't change a regime. I mean, Cuba's the perfect example. It's an island right off the coast of the United States. So look at the United States, the world global empire, and then look at this tiny island off the coast, which we've had an embargo against for 6 decades now. Does that sound about right? 5 or 6? Anyways, embargo the whole time. And for the most part, the Castro regime is still in power there, despite the fact that, the main men of the family are old, feeble men. And yet I believe that the younger brother is still running the Communist Party. And for me, it's just proof of that. And, Scott Horton always makes a good point that, you can't really expect these economic sanctions to work because the idea is if the people don't have food, they'll rise up and overthrow their government. But if you have an oppressive regime, the people who are starving to death aren't going to be able to rise up and overthrow the government. It's just a stupid amount of logic that's being used.
Very well fed.
Right. You know what? Like, fighting a war takes a lot of time and effort and manpower and especially lives. But man, if your troops aren't well fed and the government troops are, that's going to make a hell of a lot of difference when it comes down to these battles and wars. And so the idea that starving the people into overthrowing the leader is just never going to happen. And for me, I think Cuba's the best proof of that. To get into what happened more recently, I guess Obama did try to open up relations a little bit more, and certainly Obama could have done more. And it's not like he was perfect on Cuba. He kind of waited till the end of his presidency. It seemed to result in him getting a lot of flattery. And so I think he quite enjoyed that.
Was it near the end where he was kind of in a lame duck mode? Basically, was that I can't recall exactly when that was. It was later on, right?
It was definitely in the most part of the second half of his second term.
Yeah, and so that would have been basically he has no elections to help his party win.
Right, right. And so he does this, and I mean it's a good step. It's a step in the right direction, and of course, as
lambasted constantly by conservatives, right? I remember hearing all about
Marco Rubio.
Yeah, we can't, ease up on Cuba or something, as though we didn't, I mean, I was on your show specifically telling you about how Cuba gets set on the path to that, and yet we go and make it worse.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Trump comes in and undoes all the progress that Obama made, really. I believe there are still some U.S. State Department employees in the embassy there, but there was this really weird story that never got a whole lot of attention, but did result in a lot of the U.S. state personnel leaving Cuba. The people there were reporting headaches. They said there was some minor brain damage. Now, all the reporting on this is skeptical. Some people say that Cuba was using some kind of sonic weapons against the American State Department. I had somebody who was familiar with sonic weapons tell me that they're pretty easy to misuse. So it's possible that in an attempt to oppress Cuban people, maybe the American State Department officials were exposed to the sonic weapon somehow. Or another alternative was that it was just really loud crickets. Nobody actually got brain damage while in Cuba, but, from the one brain scan to the next, you hit your head on something, you get, a little bit, whatever will show up in an MRI or CAT scan.
And, you probably got brain damage from working for the State Department.
Right. There's plenty of ways that you could have something show up on a CAT scan, and that this simply wasn't the cause, and it was just an environmental change combined with a really annoying crickets that gave people a lot of headaches, and a bunch of State Department employees complained until they got sent home. And that's another alternative for what happened there. But either way, that was a step in kind of unwinding U.S. and Cuban relations. Trump, took back all the American rights to travel there, which is a blow to the Cuban economy. And of course, none of this, helps the lives of Cubans by restricting their economy even more.
No, and let's say the fact that the executive of some federal government is going to tell you where you can and can't fly to, and a conservative is gonna hurrah that. So you're actively restricting travel rights of American citizens. We're supposed to be glad about that. That makes no sense at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you saw the whole Ilhan Omar and Rashid Tlaib thing, you won't be surprised that Republicans don't care about restricting the freedom movement anymore. Nicaragua, I guess, is the least known, are what's going on there, the three countries, as far as, media coverage goes and what Trump has done. They were putting John Bolton's Troika of Tyranny and have been somewhat targeted, by some U.S. sanctions and stuff. I think mostly for doing business with Cuba and Venezuela. But I don't know a whole lot. I think Brian Sadie, who's been on the show a bunch, probably knows a little bit more, so I might be able to have him on as a guest. Not sure if Adam knows too much about this country or what the U.S. Policy is, other than I know there's some minor sanctions against the government, and it gets lumped in with the other two as kind of the communist governments all holding each other afloat and undermining, U.S. supremacy in the region. Yeah,
I don't have a ton to add. I mean, obviously it gets, it's one of the lesser known. If I'm, it's where the Sandinista movement is originated, right?
Yeah.
Fairly sure. And, I think some of that, at least, even if not in formal name, still continues. So it gives you an excuse to, continue to tarnish whoever you want. I mean, fact is, no American knows anything about Nicaragua. They probably can't find it on a map. I can't remember when I couldn't find it on a map, but I know there was a point in which I couldn't.
Right.
No one cares about Nicaragua, and how could they? I mean, they have families, and this is part of the point of why it doesn't hardly ever make sense, these sanctions or any sort of like regime change operation here. We've got families, lives, jobs, that's what we want to focus on. Why, we think that any average citizen, I mean, a peasant farmer in the forests of Central America is going to care enough that they're going to leave their family and go overthrow their government. That makes hardly, it doesn't make any sense. It might, make it look like that from, mythology of previous, revolutions and whatnot then, but, that's
this is the interesting kind of white supremacy that never gets talked about. The fact that John Bolton or Hillary Clinton could walk around saying that they know what's best for all these Latin American countries and just assert it. And, for Hillary, the better example, maybe Libya. But, you have these people that live their own way of lives and have their own things going on in their countries. And yeah, the situation there is imperfect. The government is corrupt. They imprison people, without cause, and there's political prisoners. Hey, but the U.S. is trying to arrest Julian Assange. They have Chelsea Manning locked up in jail. Edward Snowden is in exile, the largest prison population in the entire world. I mean, if you want to go through the list, you can make a pretty decent case for regime change in America if you can make a case for regime change in some of these other countries. And it's this, arrogance, and I think it's fair to call it white supremacy that, makes them think that our Western style democracy is what everybody else has to adopt. And it's disgusting. And as Adam said, most Americans shouldn't have the time and don't have the time to know anything about Nicaragua, what's going on in that country. Somebody tell me the capital. You know what I mean? No. Like, tell me the capital of the leaders,
I just look at the map and I study the capitals and stuff.
Right.
But no.
Right. But, I think that's the big point there, is just that, we shouldn't be interfering in any of these countries. And especially, where Nicaragua doesn't have the oil resources of Venezuela. And so that it seems to be even less geopolitically strategic and more just about the U.S. trying to assert its dominance in the region. And I'm sure it's political too, because, we can't sanction the Venezuelan people into overthrowing Maduro. And so we have to have some other kind of excuse for the policy failing. And if Cuba or Nicaragua is a friendly government in the region, it seems that everybody's kind of okay with just accepting that, that's the reason is there's more commies there. And so they all stick together and dang it, aren't they just undermining our policy? And so now we have to go after the Nicaraguan government because then it'll weaken the Cuban government and that'll weaken the Venezuelan government. And then after we sow chaos all over the region and get all these people killed and uprisings and all kinds of, different instability and sanctions, not getting food, not being able to export, starving people to death, then finally maybe the Venezuelan people will rise up against Maduro and wreak havoc in that country as well. All right, so on to Hong Kong stuff, because I had some questions on that as well. Past weekend seems to be the most violent protest, and I covered a little bit in the last show, so if anybody wants more details, I'll link to episode 392 of Foreign Policy Focus in the show notes page. But more violence, police are using, what they call non-lethal, which is misleading because, even a tear gas canister hits you the wrong way, it could seriously injure or kill somebody. Certainly the rubber-coated steel bullets could. One bullet a warning shot was fired in the air. But generally, it seemed like, while there was some violence, you see police swinging clubs at people who are, dressed a little bit like the Antifa and Proud Boys crowd, swinging things at the police. Overall, from what I understand is that the most provocative or radical elements of the protest movement is the student movement. Bernard has pointed out that classes resume in China in about a week, and it'll be interesting to see what happens, I guess not at this coming weekend, but the weekend after that, if things have cooled off anymore in Hong Kong, and then to what extent that the police are going to use, either more of the rubber-coated steel bullets or more lethal means in order to suppress the protesters. I feel like this is a situation where there is a lot of reason, to have animosity towards Beijing and kind of the central state. In the past episode of the show, I talked a lot about how much corruption there is in the Hong Kong government as far as distributing property goes and leasing property out to developers who are then able to charge exuberant prices because, they pretty much have a government given monopoly to them. It seems that, the Chinese government, if they could, would exert more force and will over the people of Hong Kong who, from what I could tell, probably live less intruded on lives than the people in mainland China. But at the same time, this is a complete, kind of Hong Kong China issue, and the people there need to be able to work it out. I don't think there's anything Americans do to prevent China, should they, actually want to use force to roll into Hong Kong to either suppress protesters or just assert, full territorial claims over the island. This is something that, when the UK and Margaret Thatcher were assessing what to do when their lease was running out for Hong Kong, kind of realized that, hey, there's nothing we could do militarily to stop China from rolling in there. And so they kind of just had to accept the fact that sooner or later, China would one day again control Hong Kong. And he came up with this, two systems, one country idea for 50 years that seems to have kept some kind of peace. I mean, at least there hasn't been like an invasion or any kind of full out little war breaking out there. So yeah, I think there's some probably kind of genuine domestic reasons for people to protest. Again, property, is extremely expensive. I think the Hong Kong economy has lost some of its luster with, first of all, China opening itself up to the West. This has made it so that Hong Kong doesn't have to be one of the hubs to really kind of funnel in economics, into China, whether it's manufacturing things in Hong Kong to sell in China or just using the ports there. And so some of that is worn off, as well as, just the corruption at the state level. And so there's reason for people to be upset. However, it seems to me that it's gotten even more provocative as time has gone on. Will Porter did a great job of documenting about the $2 million in U.S. government funded kind of aid that has gone to Hong Kong's protest movement since 2014. And so in a country that's, or an area that's relatively small, it's certainly, I will say, not as small as I thought. If anybody wants to look on a map, while Hong Kong Island itself is small, there's something called the New Territories, which is a good chunk of China that surrounds Hong Kong that government actually controls. So if they needed land, there is more land there to be developed. And the fact that it's not being developed is a key that the government, has 100% control and leases it out to the developers that they want to. And, by keeping a cap on it, it really allows the developers, I guess, to just rate the people for everything they got and put them in incredibly small living spaces. I see a lot of people in Hong Kong are complaining that, they're young people who can't find their own place. So they have to split their parents' apartment in two. And so now they're living in a 300 square foot apartment next to their parents. I mean, I'd probably be pretty miserable and, protesting in the streets in that situation as well. But that's, a far different situation than, the mean, evil Chinese are looking to take over Hong Kong and enforce, their social credit system on those people. One positive note I did see in the Hong Kong protests is they are ripping down those facial recognition and spy towers. And I'd love to see more of that in the U.S. If we're going to have protests, let's protest the state. Let's, rip down, some, what are they called, red light cameras, or, call out cops who are taking radar. It's one of the nice things about Waze. You can mark that down. So in general, I guess those are the thoughts I have on the Hong Kong protests. I'm guessing that eventually they're going to phase out a little bit, but, you never know. It could continue going. Syria is another place I had a question on updates. Like I said, this is again something I covered a little bit in the last show, particularly with Israel striking within Syria. The Kurds saying that they are open to a 3 to 9 mile safe zone within the Syrian side of the border between Syria and Turkey. That would be east of the Euphrates River. Turkey says they're not going to allow that to be slow rolled, and have long complained that the Kurds haven't given up the territory that they promised to in and around Manbij, which is one of the towns right on the east side of the Euphrates River. And Turkey has, drawn a red line saying the Kurds have to be on the west side of that. This is an ongoing, tense situation in Syria that's extremely complicated, as Turkey is basically working against not only the United States and their proxies, the Syrian YPGs, but also acting through their batch groups, which include groups tied to al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda in Syria, as well as their less radical, but still pretty radical rebels that they support, the Euphrates Shields and the more Muslim Brotherhood types versus the jihadists there in northern Syria. As Assad is reclaiming that territory, as I said recently, he retook the town of Khan Sheikhoun. That was pretty significant, and it seems that it is just going to be another situation where Assad and Russia, kind of carry out this campaign where they, bombings, they get the terrorists out. Where they can, they try to let people go, but a lot of people are going to die in this campaign. They say 1 to 2 million people are now packed into this Idlib province. There's car bombs going off in the city. This isn't even Assad blowing people off. This is, the different rebel groups blowing each other up. There's all kinds of Turkish outposts all along the Idlib province, and they're saying that some of these airstrikes against the rebel groups are getting close to the Turkish positions. So all I say for Syria is that it continues to be a real mess, and I think it's only gotten more complicated since I started covering this story, which is really amazing, because when I started covering it out, I was like, hey everybody, this is kind of like the Game of Thrones thing going on here. You got 9 different people competing for the throne in Damascus. There's all these crazy groups and bad stabbings, and the rebels are constantly changing names and allegiances. Russia gets involved, the U.S. gets involved. We each have our different proxy groups that we're supporting, but it's still extremely complicated. And I don't necessarily think, we're within months of any kind of deal to end this Syrian civil war. It'll be interesting, I guess, to see what happens once the main Al-Qaeda faction, HTS, is defeated in the Idlib province, or to whatever extent it could be defeated. And then Assad is left with only territory held by the Syrian Kurds, the United States, or the Turkish-backed more moderate fighters. I believe that's like Anwar Tahrir al-Sham. So, that's kind of what I have on Syria for now. I don't know a whole lot else of what's going on. I'm not sure if Adam has anything to weigh in on here. Do you have anything to say about Syria other than it's a huge mess?
Yeah, well, I don't follow it super closely, and as you're hinting at, it's not exactly that easy to follow it, right?
It's almost impossible unless you're either a Syrian or somebody who just could sit there and look at stuff on Syria all day, because there's so much conflicting reporting.
Let's be clear. If you're a Syrian that's still left in Syria, right? If you haven't already fled for your life.
Right, the millions that have been driven out and the hundreds of thousands killed.
And somewhere else. Let's not forget that Turkey, of course, the reason why Turkey makes any difference to the U.S. is always because they were later a NATO member, and, they like to court themselves between the U.S. and Russia, so depending on, who wants to be on their good graces, and you can, trade around this favor or that, or in this threat or that not. Let's recall that early on in that Syrian civil war, Turkey was allowing fighters across its border into Syria pretty freely, as I recall reading, from, places like The Independent and Patrick, whatever his last name is.
Coburn?
Yeah. I don't know why so
bringing up
in the libertarian world. So.
Yeah, talking about the Russia-Turkey relationship just for a second before we move on, it's interesting that at the start of this war, or start of the Russian involvement, Turkey shot down a Russian plane, and now things have changed so much in geopolitics that Russia is selling Turkey S-400 air defense systems and talks with Turkey to sell them, fighter jets, including stealth aircraft, since the U.S. cut them out of the F-35 project. And so I think that's going to be the next huge thing in the U.S.-Turkey relationship. While there is the Syrian Kurd issue, Americans care a lot about their weapons sales. Or the American establishment does, not the rest of us. But, those people who profit off it care a lot about it and have a lot to say about U.S. foreign policy. And so when Turkey starts looking elsewhere for their fighter jets, that could start to be a real problem in that relationship. And it just shows what a mess that the U.S. has gotten themselves in Syria, where if we're not backing and arming the Syrian YPG this whole time, maybe we have some more leverage to use over Turkey to get them to at least not buy $5 billion in Russian missile defense systems. But, with the incentives the Obama administration put forward, it's no surprise that, Turkey is moving away from the, U.S. and NATO orbit. Not that I guess I'm terribly, committed to that at all, but just if you want the U.S., looking at it from a strategic perspective of theirs, this Syrian civil war has been absolute disastrous failure. And of course, for the rest of us who don't care necessarily about geopolitics, or Turkey's in NATO or not, and that doesn't really matter to our safety. This war did fuel jihadist uprisings and the rise of the Islamic State. So bad for everyone. Yemen, let's see. I don't think there's a whole lot going on in northern Yemen other than the Houthis launching drones and missiles at the Saudis and the Saudis bombing Sana'a. The people continue to suffer. The country's blockaded. It's only getting worse. It's not getting better, but I don't have a whole lot of updates. Of course, there's, as far as I could tell, no battle lines changing. In the south, there's a little bit more of a dynamic situation going on as the southern separatists seize the second capital city of Yemen, Aden, from the Saudi-backed Hadi government. The Hadi government is strongly allied with the Muslim Brotherhood al-Islah group in Yemen. And so that was the issue that the southern separatists had. They say, you're too close to the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't want any involvement with you. Of course, this is reflective of the UAE influence. The UAE heavily backs the southern separatists. That's, I think, been their kind of preferred proxy force in Yemen. And so that the Southern separatists, kind of split more officially with the Saudi government. People are wondering if this is signs of a fractured relationship between Saudi and the UAE. I really don't have anything to say on that yet. But the Southern separatists took a whole bunch of territories. The Saudis actually started bombing them. And now they've given some of that territory back, it seems, including the airport in Aden. But that was only after a significant amount of Saudi airstrikes. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the situation going on right now in Yemen. It's just like kind of a slow moving genocide in that country. And, with more fighting in the south, that's only going to damage infrastructure down there, with Saudi carrying out airstrikes now in Aden and making the situation a whole lot more dangerous. Now, the Houthis have shown some new drone and missile capabilities recently, and there have been some, taught that, maybe this is going to start to wind down the war when the Saudis realize there's nothing they could do to prevent their oil infrastructure from being destroyed by the Houthis. But I kind of agree with what Scott Horton said on my show on the Monday episode 391, where he said, I think, Bernhard of Moon of Alabama kind of overstates the case. And that the Saudis and Mohammed bin Salman seems very tied to this war. I don't know if he's going to walk away from it. Got anything on Yemen, Adam?
Not really. I remember seeing that, that they had that those rebels had I guess hit oil facilities or something like that in Saudi Arabia. So that's kind of that catches your attention, I guess. That gets your definitely makes you look up and notice things. Obviously Yemen for the U.S. very closely tied to Iran. If you're following it pretty closely and you looked into those ties, they don't seem to actually, pan out that much. But even so, it's meant to kind of smear Yemen to say that they might be supported by Iran. But anyone who's for self-determination and saying that Yemen would want to be their own country or to direct their own government, wouldn't someone supporting them be a freedom fighter or a regional America in a sense? If you're almost supporting, in the sort of Wilsonian sense, the separatist, force that wants to kind of represent themselves and have their own, choose who their own president is or leader is over someone that Saudi Arabia would kind of just sugarcoat or make a puppet or Hillary Clinton to nominate for you, for that matter. I don't know where we've gotten so turned around in this case, where it's almost like foreign policy becomes a matter of the same sort of factors that happen in the partisan politics in the U.S., right? Where, if you're in this party allied with this people, good. If you're allied with this one, bad. And that's as simple as it gets. That's as simple as it needs to be. You can't be good and have any ties to these people over here, instead of adding any sort of nuance to it at all, right?
Right. So last thing I have, and I want to wrap up pretty quick here, Adam, but just to briefly answer a question I have from Stephen Waskow, who, like myself and Adam Graham, is often published at the Libertarian Institute, mainly on the blog, but he had a featured article pretty recently that was really good on Afghanistan. He asked a question about Afghanistan, just if I was as optimistic as Scott Horton, who, if you listen to episode 391 again in the show, a little bit optimistic that maybe something will come out of the Afghan peace talks. On the show, I guess somewhat playing devil's advocate, but somewhat, kind of just my feeling on the matter is I'm a little bit concerned that a deal doesn't get done now. It seems like the war party has started to move in here. If you look at any coverage of Afghanistan, even if it's the Islamic State Khorasan faction, which nobody in the media actually understands what that is. But let's say they carry out some kind of attack. Well, they end up, being the ones, they kind of frame it as, well, Afghanistan's still very violent. The U.S. has to stay. The Taliban, are there. When it really, the Islamic State Khorasan is the enemy of the Taliban as well. I'm sure the Taliban will fight against them just as much as they fight against the Afghan government once the Americans are gone. And that should be a kind of an important thing for Americans to know and understand, is that the Taliban are the enemies of the American people. And are the enemies of the American people, right? I got that right now. The Taliban are the enemies of the Islamic State Khorasan, which is the enemies of the American people, right? That all made sense. Yeah, it's tired here and I need to wrap up the show. So I'm concerned that just with that amount of pushback, and unless there's some kind of quick timeline for withdrawal, and the fact that, you have Bolton and Pence and Pompeo weighing in on the talks to Donald Trump, I'm a little bit pessimistic, that a deal gets done here. I hope I'm wrong. I'm fine with being wrong on this one. I would like a deal to get done. But at this point, I guess I would say that, I wouldn't bet on it. I don't know if you have anything there, Adam, on, Afghan peace talks.
Yeah, I guess I mean, you would think the potential for having peace with the Taliban would be there since, the U.S. helped create it and, has supported it at certain times in the past. So, I don't see why we can't return to that. But I think it probably still comes down to some electoral pressure with that, as well, right? Even though the political will is there in a sense to let Afghanistan kind of wrap itself up, you also run the case where I think if Trump can say, we're very close here, or we're, while I'm pursuing this, then there's some chance, the longer that stretches on and the more you become entrenched in that as an administration, I could almost see that played, especially against any sort of, opponent he might have that, for all he knows, might end up being on the other side of him, who would say, maybe we don't need to pull out of Afghanistan, right? It becomes a status quo that he can pull. Kind of like if you think about if a Supreme Court, justice, seat comes open right before a major presidential election, right? It behooves you to keep that kind of in your back pocket as saying, well, I can make this happen. And frankly, it would be a quick win for him either right before an election, once it's more official and more solid, or even, right after, that kind of first 100 days sort of thing, right? Big win for him. He might also have a lot of, officials, State Department or otherwise, different military, members, along with him there. So I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if he continued to drag it out for that sort of purpose. I don't know. A lot revolves around power in that case.
Yeah.
And I think I was seeing reports that really, that some people there, even if you had Taliban peace, you would still have military presence there. I think the Pentagon was giving different cues versus the State Department. Of course, they're always split on these things anyway. They don't communicate very well.
Right. And then so you even have the CIA is involved. Yeah. And so even if the Pentagon leaves, I think you'd be crazy to think the CIA was going to leave or stop supporting their military proxy forces there.
Peace with the Taliban does not mean the Afghan war is over.
Right. I guess that should be
a step in it, but
something to note that even if it's not over for the Americans, even if the CIA did leave, calling it a peace deal is kind of misleading in itself because, we have to know that the Taliban aren't done fighting, right? There's probably still some territory that's going to exchange hands. There's probably still some, Pashtun dominated areas that are controlled by the Northern Alliance. Once the Americans are gone in that central state and, we're done paying for their army, you're going to have a lot more desertions. There's no way they could hold all the territory they can. And I'm imagining that the Taliban will take that back. And so, even, calling it a peace deal, that I think that's just to kind of salvage Trump's feelings because really it's a negotiation of America's loss of that war. But either way, bring our troops home. Had a couple more Green Berets die there a couple weeks ago. Don't need that to happen anymore. Bring them all home. Stop wasting American lives and money in that war. Stop killing Afghanis and let those people figure out what they want to do with their own country. We'll mind our own business trying to do things, over here in America. So I guess this is a good time to wrap up, Adam. Thanks so much for, coming on and being a patron of the show. If you guys want to join the show, the live stream next month, you do that by being a $5 donor at patreon.com/foreign policy focus. Although Adam gets on the show by writing articles for the Libertarian Institute as well. So if anybody wants to take the time to write a good foreign policy article for Scott, over at the Libertarian Institute, I might interview for that reason too. I really appreciate for everybody who donates. And again, I can't say it enough. Check out the libertarianinstitute.org for all of my work, the daily news roundup, the blog section there, which features, like I said, Stephen Waskow, Scott Horton, Peter Quinones. The featured articles is where you find Adam Graham and past guests of the show like Will Porter. And then my show is featured there on the homepage as well. So thanks everybody. Thanks Adam. And, I'll do this again next month.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's good.